Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2023 Skate Canada Ice Summit and the pre-conference workshops. My name is Jeff Partrick, Corporate Services Director with Skate Canada, and I will be your host for our virtual conference this year. I am speaking to you today from Ottawa, the home of Skate Canada's National Service Centre. I would like to begin by acknowledging that this land is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I am grateful to have the opportunity to be present in this territory. We have a couple of pre-conference sessions to kick off our activities this year that will provide us with information relevant to our upcoming annual general meeting this coming Saturday, May 27th at 1200 Eastern Time. To begin, we will first have a finance presentation from Mary Ellen McDonald, Senior Director Operations, reviewing the financial statements of Skate Canada in advance of the finance presentation at the AGM. Following Mary Ellen's presentation, we will then have a Meet the Candidate session at 2000, where we will host a Q&A with the individuals running for elected positions on the 2023-2024 Skate Canada Board of Directors. The Board of Directors elections will be held during the AGM this coming Saturday. To access the Meet the Candidate session, go to the 2023 Ice Summit homepage and click on the link at 2000 hours. If you are attending the annual general meeting this Saturday, please ensure you've completed the two-step declaration process by 1100 Eastern Time, Saturday, May 27th. Look for the Declare Now button on the AGM page of the Ice Summit web pages. Translation for the workshops today will be provided through captions at the bottom of your screen. So, let's proceed with our scheduled workshop presentation. It's now my pleasure to introduce Mary Ellen McDonald, Senior Director Operations with Skate Canada, who will provide us with a presentation on Skate Canada's financial statements. If you have questions regarding her material, please send an email to info@skatecanada.ca with Finance Webinar in the subject line, and we will respond to your question as quickly as possible. Mary Ellen, over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the presentation. I'd like to first start off with a little bit of housekeeping. Friendly reminder that the AGM is Saturday, May 27th, 2023 at noon Eastern. It is extremely important that you declare to attend. The statements that are being presented today will require approval by the membership at that meeting. In today's agenda, we will actually be reviewing the financial statements, the audit process, the statement of financial position, the statement of operations, and then as Jeff pointed out, there'll be an opportunity for you to send in questions that will be answered. So I'd like to start with a description of the audit timeline. So as was the case last year, we were able to actually have PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, on site to perform the audit. The ability to be in person greatly improves the efficiency and effectiveness and the timeliness of the audit itself, and it allows Skate Canada to be able to meet the requirements to have the draft financial statements posted 21 days prior to the AGM. Our statements have been posted to the member site for the ICE Summit, and they were posted on May the 5th, 2023. It also allows us to have the audited financial statements approved by the board and available to the membership for approval at the AGM. The audit itself was conducted using the new audit standard CAS 315. Identifying and assessing risks of material misstatement. So the audit risk model itself hasn't changed. However, the standard has been significantly revised, reorganized, and enhanced to require a more robust risk identification and assessment in order to promote a better response to any of the identified risks. The revised standard introduced new concepts and definitions, enhancements and clarifications that helped PwC apply the audit risk model and strengthened documentation requirements relating to the exercise of professional skepticism, among other things. So for Skate Canada, this did result in expanding sample sizes, performing additional confirmations, performing unpredictable testing of certain balances, and testing significant accounting estimates and obtaining more in-depth understanding of the risks facing Skate Canada. And then there were two important comments that PwC made to the Finance and Enterprise Risk Management Committee when they presented the financial statements for the year end on May 17th, 2023. The first was that they asserted that based on the results of the audit procedures performed, they have not identified any instances of management override of controls that were indicative of fraud. Secondly, based on the procedures that they performed, they did not identify any indication of fraud as a result of improper revenue recognition. These two statements are extremely important for everyone to understand because what they mean is that the auditor believes and has asserted that our controls are strong. There is no fraud that they have that, sorry, I'm going to repeat that the controls are strong and that there's no indication of fraud. Also, the fact that there was no improper revenue recognition is very important to issuing a clean audit opinion on a not-for-profit organization. Because one of the responsibilities of the auditor is to issue an opinion as to whether the financial statements are free of material misstatement. PwC was able to issue such opinion. And more importantly, there were no items resulting from the audit that required Skate Canada staff to make adjustments to the financial statements, nor were there any items noted that remained as unadjusted. So sometimes the auditor will look at items that, in their opinion, should be adjusted, but they are below the materiality threshold. And they'll say, we need to put these on a schedule of unadjusted items. In this year's audit, there was no unadjusted items noted by the auditors, which is really important because what that means is that the reconciliations have been well done. The confirmations came back with positive information confirming what we were stating in our statements. Any of the risks assessments they were doing indicated that the statements could be relied on. And I just wanted to go into detail on this because the statements themselves this year really reflect business as usual pre-COVID times. So there's not a lot of anomalies in the statements. However, there still exists a going concern amongst all enterprises coming out of COVID. So the fact that we were able to have full assurance over our statements is a very good indication of the health of the organization from a financial standpoint, but more importantly, from a control and governance point of view. I'm going to move on to the actual statement of financial position. And I always say in a lot of meetings with Skate Canada that cash is king, because without the cash, we often can't run any of the programs, we can't pay our bills, we can't pay the employees, and most importantly, we can't fund the sections with our Skate Canada payments that we have an obligation to, under a memorandum of understanding. So again, this year we had to do careful cash management of the operations throughout the entire fiscal year. It was known last year that COVID relief funding and general relief was to be suspended by the federal government as well as the International Skating Union, and therefore there would be a negative impact on cash flow. As many of you have seen in your sections, your clubs, and your personal lives, the cost of living has increased significantly, which for Skate Canada in particular resulted in expenditures being greater than originally anticipated for the fiscal year 2022-2023. Many of our expenses are commodity driven, meaning that we will have cost increases passed on to us as the final consumer of the services. Unfortunately, this does not translate into an equal and offsetting revenue increase. So items such as registration fees, insurance recoveries, event ticket prices are set in advance of knowing the true impact of any of the price increases, and therefore there is a resulting mismatch on a recovery basis. Prepaid expenses, the second arrow that you see. The increase is due to the payment of certain ISU 2024 World Championship expenses in advance of the event being held in March of 2024 in Montreal. The largest single asset on the Skate Canada Statement of Financial Position is our investments, and that's the third arrow. So the investment market has experienced swings that have greatly impacted returns this year. There were periods of significant unrealized gains offset by significant unrealized losses. And in 2022, both the bond and the stock markets were down for the first time in 50 years and the third time since 1930. The bond market is expected to improve in 2023, which should result in some recovery in the Skate Canada portfolio. We also knew that interest rates had been predicted to increase in 2022, and Skate Canada, with the assistance of BMO, who is our investment advisor, moved some fixed income instruments into a one-year GIC, which is a guaranteed investment certificate. And then upon maturity of those GICs in February of 2023, Skate Canada reinvested all but $2 million into the bond market and high interest savings accounts. Now that $2 million we transferred to our current cash account, and this was all in anticipation of cash outlays on account of Worlds 2024 prior to receiving monies from our funding partners as well as revenue from ticket sales. Now, capital assets, that saw a significant increase. That's the fourth arrow on this sheet, and that saw a significant increase in the current year. And that is because Skate Canada is investing in long-term technology projects. And so that's creating an increase in work in process in the capital assets. So there's external costs associated with two particular projects, the digital transformation and the virtual Hall of Fame. These costs are being capitalized, and then when they are, I'm going to air quote this, commercially viable, the costs will be expensed as amortization in the financial statements. And for Skate Canada, commercially viable means that we're able to launch these applications and our stakeholders and other external members are able to utilize these either applications or, in the case of the Virtual Hall of Fame, are allowed to visit our Virtual Hall of Fame. The next is the liabilities and net assets. So there's a few changes, two main changes on here, and one is the accounts payable and accrued liabilities, the very first arrow. And that has increased primarily for two specific reasons. The first is that we had in accounts payable at year end approximately $300,000 over and above our normal trade payables. On account of World Junior Championship invoices still required, they had been recorded, but they just needed to be paid. World Juniors finalized at the end of February, so the timing of the payment is 30 to 45 days after receipt of that invoice. So it made sense that this did increase. An additional $180,000 of this is in accrued liabilities. And that is as a direct result of higher section payments because we have an increase in registrant activity this year across Canada. The next arrow, you'll see net assets unrestricted. And this is where the gain or loss, the profit or revenue from the profit or loss, I should say, from the current year is actually reflected in the net assets. So as we move through the income statement, that particular figure will be described in more detail. I also want to draw your attention to the two lines at the bottom that say Karen Butcher, President, Deborah Armstrong, Chief Executive Officer. So this is where the President and the CEO sign and or certify the financial statements immediately after review with the board and approval of the financial statements. This is in similar fashion as to profit organizations whose CEO and president or chairman of the board sign the financial statements. This is a display of strong governance practices And Skate Canada has been working significantly on strengthening governance practices over the last few years, and this really speaks to that in itself. So now we're going to move on to the statement of operations, and we're first going to go through our revenue, and then we'll go through the expenses. Membership. So for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2023, you will see that there was a $4.1 million increase overall in revenue from prior year. And I will now go through where some of those significant changes occurred. So the first is in membership. The current year saw a month-over-month increase in registrants that resulted in registrant figures being the highest in Skate Canada's history. The final figure was over 202,000 registrants. And there was an increase of 40,651 registrants from the previous fiscal year. This change did result in a significant increase in revenue, of which 50% of that membership figure for registrants is paid back directly to the sections to aid in their programming. There, I don't have an arrow beside it. However, assessment fees is another strong indicator of the strength in the membership and the return to sport. So this is the first year that we have, since pre-COVID, that we have seen the assessment fee revenue be in excess of $1 million. What this says to us is not only are our registrant numbers increasing, we also know that there was a delay in skill acquisition as a result of COVID closures, and that's now lessening, resulting in more skaters being ready for assessments in the current fiscal year. Again, showing yet one more indicator that we've had a very strong return to sport for Skate Canada and all the associated sections and clubs. The largest singular increase on our financial statements is events. And this is primarily driven by the fact that we held 2 world championships in this fiscal year. At the beginning of April, we held the 2022 World Synchronized Figure Skating Championships, which accounted for about $1.3 million in revenue. And then in February of 2023, we held the 2023 World Junior Figure Skating Championships, which accounted for $2.3 million of revenue. So you see right there that there's $3.6 million of increased revenue just from those 2 events. And the overall increase in this line item is 3.8. So again, showing that it's those 2 world championships that are creating the increase here. You'll also see on the third arrow, the government and other grants. And this number significantly decreased, about 1.6 million. Well, this is primarily due to 2 reasons. One, as I mentioned earlier, we were receiving, as many other NSOs and many other businesses and even individuals, relief under COVID programs that the federal government had in place, and also in our instance that the ISU had in place. So there was $1.3 million of COVID funding that was received in 2022 fiscal year end that was non-recurring. The other variance is a decrease in our COC OTP funding of $358,000. This is the first time that enhanced excellent funding has been decreased, and it's being distributed by the government into other areas. So now that then shows all of the changes, the significant changes in the revenue line items, showing that there was an increase in revenue of 4 million and the major sources that this one came from. Now we're going to move to the expense side. And on the expense side, we see a few things. So our first arrow is the section payments. And you'll see that that's increased by about 1.1 million. And that is directly related to the increase in registrant activity. What the memorandum of understanding that Skate Canada has with the various sections, all the sections across Canada, is that 50% of the registrant fee, so in the current year that was $40, 50% of that $40 goes directly back to the section in which the club is registered. 30% of all assessment fees go back and 20% of coach fees go back to the sections. These are paid back as section payments, and those monies are paid so that the sections are able to support programming, they're able to support coach development and official development. The next line item that had significant costs is the events line. And this was $3.8 million higher than the prior year. And again, that came to the execution of 2 international events. The cost associated with those 2 international events was $3.3 million. There was also what's impacting the events line is the change in event execution strategy to align with the long-term development model. You'll note that there is a junior senior challenge, a pre-novice novice challenge, and a novice championships with Canada Cup, synchro and the novice championships rolled into one event, and synchronized skating for the junior and senior rolled into the Canadian national championships. And that long-term model did create one additional event. And also, as I mentioned earlier, just those general price increases in commodity pricing, any fuel costs, any transportation costs, any food costs, those all have an impact on the costs associated with events. The next line you'll see is salaries, benefits, and professional development, and this increased about $378,000. This is because we were able to have an annualization of filled positions for the year. And this is the first year since 2019-2020 that Skate Canada has returned its staff complement to pre-COVID levels. Just flipping my page here. The next line that you'll see is professional fees and contracted services. So the primary increase in this line item of approximately $360,000 is the increases in increased legal costs and investigation costs as a result of Skate Safe, and as well as increased costs for streaming content for Skate Canada hosted events. Travel and living is the one other line item that is showing significant increase of about $800,000. And it's starting to sound a little bit like a broken record. However, 22-23 was the first year since COVID that Skate Canada had a full travel year to international events. We were able to have in-person board meetings. SCC meetings were able to be in person. Planning meetings with the SCC and the board were able to be had in person. And we were also able to really fully execute the next gen and high performance counts. So what you're seeing through all of this with the increase in our expenses from 17 million to 23.8 million is really that we're back to business as usual. And I think that that's really indicative of a few things. We were able to have all of our events in person this year. Clubs are seeing unprecedented activity at their clubs for their Can Skate, Can Power, Star Skate, and then any podium pathway sessions. So we're really starting to see a great growth back into the system. So that leaves us with the overall statement of operations. And you can see by the slide here that we did experience net loss from operations of 2.6 million. So our revenue was 21 million. Our expenses were 23.8 million, resulting in a net loss. We had, with all the ups and downs of the market, we ended up having a net investment loss of $33,125. And then our net, resulting in the net loss for the year of 2.7 million. So as I've done in the past, what I would like to do is show what the impact of COVID and the worlds to really put our statements finally at a result, revenue and expense from ongoing operations. And this will be the last year that we should have to actually show this. However, I do think it's really important because last year's comparatives had a significant amount of COVID recoveries, and we were still receiving recoveries actually from various government agencies with respect to Worlds 2020. So you'll see that when we look at the revenue from ongoing operations, we're really comparing again approximately the 21 million, because we had $130,000 in COVID grants from the ISU for travel. And that compares to the 15.4 million of a revenue from ongoing operations that's in 2022. There's absolutely no change to expenses, showing that the expenses are just business as usual. But what this does show at the very end is that the that we have $23.7 million in expenses, $17 million in expenses. So when we actually normalize, it was a $2.8 million expense or loss from ongoing operations versus a $1.6 million loss from ongoing operations. When we were doing forecasting 4, 5, 6 years ago, we knew that this time would come. We knew that the broadcast rights associated with one major sponsor were set to expire last year. We also knew associated with that broadcast rights, they not only paid Skate Canada to broadcast, they also paid for the production. Now we turned around, we knew this year, 2023, was going to be the first year where we would not receive money for broadcasting, and we would also have to be paying for our own production. So we knew there was going to come a time where we were going to see a significant impact to the financial statements that we would start to work ourselves out of through our live streaming activities, through other projects and other strategic initiatives. So while what this means is we have to manage our cash carefully, we have to ensure that we're still offering quality programming, and we have to look at new and innovative ways to monetize certain assets that we have. So that brings to close the report that I want to present for today. It wasn't as long as it has been in the past because our statements are really very straightforward. And I would like to thank you all for providing me with the opportunity to just see a little bit of our statements and also have an insight into how the audit is performed and how we're doing from a financial perspective. Jeff, I'll turn it back over to you at this time.
Thank you, Mary Ellen, for all that detailed information. Remember, if you do have any questions, please send them to info@skatecanada.ca, and we will respond to them as quickly as we can. So our next session is the Meet the Candidate session, which is coming up at 2000 hours. So we will take a short break, and we'll see you again at that time. To access that session, please return to the 2023 ICE Summit homepage and look for the Meet the Candidates link for that session, or to the ICE Summit conference portal. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you again shortly.